Hello, 8th grade. Today is May 6th. Some of you may or may not know this, but May 6th is National Nurses Day. So, in celebrating National Nurses Day, I thought I would share with you a few nurse related pickup lines that you can use down the road in your life. If you're going to date any nurses, you could use this as a pickup line, or I guess a male nurse. I call male nurses nurses. I don't know about you guys. I think that should be a thing. Um, but without further ado, here we go. Whew. Do you have an inhaler? Because you took my breath away. That one's good. Or oh, ow, ow. Do you have a Band-Aid? Because I scraped my knee when I was falling for you. Or are you a coronary artery? Because you're wrapped around my heart. What do you think? Pretty good, huh? All right. So we're going to continue our lesson on section 1. And I don't know, maybe we'll move into section 2 in this video. We will see. Oh, great. My neighbor just turned on a buzz saw. Hopefully that doesn't interfere with the sound in this video too much. Okay. Let's see. So we are talking about slavery and how the Mexican-American War basically poured gasoline on the fire and caused the slavery issue to divide the North and the South even more. In the last video, I talked about how people were more divided over the slavery issue than they were over anything else. So if you were from the North, you had a lot more in common with people who were from a different political party than you did with people from the South who were part of the same political party as you. And again, this is because the Democrats and the Whigs refused to take any strong position on the slavery issue. This is really good coffee. I go to Canterbrew in Chino. I don't know if you guys can see that. But yeah, it's worth it. If you're ever in the Chino or Chino Hills area and you want to stop for coffee, don't go to Starbucks. Go to Canterbrew. It's pretty good. The owner thinks I'm hilarious, by the way. So, at least someone does. All right. All right, we're moving on to the year 1849. Zachary Taylor, a Whig candidate, is president of the United States. And in the year 1849, we have a little something called the California Gold Rush. Now, we're not going to learn about the Gold Rush this year because we skipped over it in chapters 8 and 9 because I needed to get to the Civil War by the end of the year. But basically, in 1849, gold was discovered in California, and this led to a massive influx of migrants into California. And so California now had enough people to become a state. Now remember, California is part of the Mexican Cession. So after the Mexican-American War, Mexico has to cede a lot of its territory to the United States. This would include Arizona, Nevada, California, parts of Colorado, and New Mexico as well. So California is going to be admitted to the Union. California's population is mostly not interested in slavery. And there's a variety of reasons for this. We won't really get into it, though, but it looks like California is going to be admitted as a free state. So Southerners who supported slavery were really upset at this. And in fact, a lot of southern states threatened to secede from the Union if California was admitted as a free state. So they said, if California is a free state, this is going to disrupt the balance of power between slave states and free states in Congress. And so we're just going to leave the country. We're going to go form our own different country with all the other slavery supporting states. And we're just not going to be part of the United States anymore. Right? So this is a really tense issue, California's status. A second big issue that's raging in the country right now is whether Washington, D.C. should allow slavery. Now, this doesn't really matter so much for the balance of power in Congress. Washington, D.C. does not have any senators, for example. So if Washington, D.C. is admitted, or it's already part of the country, but if Washington, D.C. allows slavery or doesn't allow slavery, it doesn't really disrupt the balance of power, but it is a big symbolic victory for whichever side wins Washington, D.C. So if Washington, D.C. allows slavery, that's going to be a really big symbolic victory for the South. Because remember, Washington, D.C. is the capital of the country. People still look to Washington, D.C. as sort of the political trendsetter. So there's a really big fight over California. There's a really big fight over Washington, D.C. A third big problem comes from a question involving the issue of fugitive slaves. So in other words, do fugitive slaves, when they escape to free states, are they safe? Right? So if I'm a slave and I escape from my slave owner in Mississippi, and I go all the way up to Minnesota, which is a free state, am I safe? Right? Southerners thought that the answer to that question was no, right? Because you are still the property of a slave owner. Northerners thought, no, now that you're in a free state where slavery is illegal, you are no longer property, now you are a person. So this is the time when we see a famous activist named Harriet Tubman. She was an escaped slave who operated something called the Underground Railroad, which helped slaves escape into the North, where they would be safe. Well, allegedly, they'd be safe. If Southerners got their way, then they'd be able to come into the northern states and grab them and take them back to the South. All right. Ooh, there's John C. Calhoun. So Southerners like John C. Calhoun saw California for what it was, a threat to the balance of power between free states and slave states in Congress. And he thought if California was admitted as a free state, this would be of irreversible damage to the slavery movement and to the states' rights movement in the South. So Calhoun, like a lot of Southerners, thought that more important than preserving the union of the states, more important than preserving the country, was the ability to preserve the Southern way of life. And as we know, slavery was central to the Southern way of life. So Calhoun said, in order to preserve the Southern way of life, we can only do one of two things. Either we pass a constitutional amendment that protects states' rights, including the right to keep slavery. So he wants slavery to be permanently legal in the states that have it. Right? He wanted states to have the ability to decide if they have slavery or not, regardless of the federal government's opinion. So he thought federal government should not be making any laws about slavery whatsoever, unless that law is a constitutional amendment that says, states, you get to decide for yourselves if you're going to allow slavery. So he said, we could either have that, or we secede from the Union. We leave the United States. We form our own country. Right? So John C. Calhoun was very well liked in the South, of course. But in the North, people did not like John C. Calhoun. A lot of the country, however, was still looking for compromise. So in response to John C. Calhoun's famous statement that we're either going to secede or we're going to have a constitutional amendment, one or the other, Henry Clay proposed another compromise, right? So we already had the Missouri Compromise, and now we're going to have something called the Compromise of 1850, which is Henry Clay's response. So Henry Clay's compromise we'll get into in a little bit, but basically what you need to know now is that the Southerners did not like Henry Clay's compromise, and neither did the North. Nobody liked the compromise. But the reason Henry Clay supported compromise is because he thought, all right, we need to do whatever we can to prevent the war, to prevent secession, to preserve the Union. I have a funny comment here. That's pretty good. I forgot. I wrote that a while ago. All right. Henry Clay proposes this compromise in Congress, and John C. Calhoun gives a really famous speech. Now, John C. Calhoun at this point is very sick. He's near his death. In fact, he's going to die 4 weeks after giving the speech. But the speech was basically this passionate defense of states' rights and slavery. He said, basically, this is our way of life. If you can't accept it, we don't belong in this country. We're going to form our own country. All right. So, in the year 1850, Congress passes a bill reflecting Henry Clay's compromises. This is called the Compromise of 1850, right? Now, the only reason this bill becomes a law is because President Zachary Taylor goes to a party and he eats an absurd amount of fruit that is contaminated, and he drinks an absurd amount of contaminated milk. Now, why you go to a party that has a bunch of fruit and milk and you just eat all of it, I don't know. It was hot. It was in an area of the city where there's a lot of open sewers, so it smelled really bad. But Zachary Taylor just saw the fruit spread and saw like these milk jugs, and he was like, give me. And he just stuffed his face with a bunch of fruit and milk, and he got really sick and died. That's literally what happened to him. So if you don't like eating fruit, if your parents make you eat fruit, you can be like, Mom, President Zachary Taylor died because he ate too much fruit. Yeah. So anyways, Zachary Taylor was strongly opposed to the Compromise of 1850. He never would have signed it into law, meaning it would have gone back to Congress and they would have to override his veto with a 2/3 vote, which was very unlikely to happen. But because he dies, his vice president, Millard Fillmore, takes his place. And Millard Fillmore disagrees with Zachary Taylor about the Compromise of 1850. Millard Fillmore thinks the Compromise of 1850 is good. Zachary Taylor thinks it's bad. He thinks it's just going to make things worse. Millard Fillmore is like, we need to stop all this infighting about slavery. Compromise is good. So he signs the Compromise of 1850 into law. Now, what's going to happen is Southerners are going to hate the compromise because they think it violates states' rights, it violates federalism, it encroaches too much on the slavery issue. They think it helps the North and hurts the South. But the North hates it even more, right? The Compromise of 1850 really, really, really makes the North mad. And we'll talk about why that is in the next video. But basically, the Compromise of 1850 is going to make them believe that slavery is just pure evil. It's terrible. We got to get rid of it, right? So not surprisingly, both sides hate it. So this just makes the situation worse. Zachary Taylor was right. Millard Fillmore was wrong. Now, I included an image here. It's a famous image of Solomon. If you ever heard the phrase split the baby, you'll know what this means. Basically, it means that oftentimes compromises just make situations worse, right? So in the Bible story, King Solomon deals with two women who both claim to be the mother of this baby. And so King Solomon says, oh, okay, well, since we can't decide who's the real mother, we're just going to cut the baby in half, right? Obviously, that would just make the situation worse because a dead baby is worse than no baby, right? That's the case here. Compromise of 1850 is kind of like cutting the baby in half, right? It doesn't solve the problem, it makes it worse. Okay, in the next video, I'll talk about what the Compromise of 1850 contained, why it made people so mad, and what the consequences of it were.